10 years ago, my sister stole the man I was about to marry, a wealthy heir who promised her the world. Now, at our mother's funeral, she paraded him through the repast, flashing a diamond the size of a grape, and whispered, "Poor you, still alone at 38. I got the man, the money, and the mansion." I took a slow sip of my bourbon, smiled, and replied, "Have you met my husband yet?" When I called him over from the library, her husband dropped his scotch glass, shattering it on the marble floor, because my husband was the billionaire who secretly owned his entire family legacy. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to smile while dismantling the toxic family that tried to break you. The scent of white lilies and catered food filled the air of our family estate in upscale Buckhead, Atlanta. The repast was in full swing, but it felt more like a high society gala than a gathering of mourning. I stood alone near the mahogany bar wearing a tailored black suit, watching the performative grief unfold all around me. My mother Vivian had passed away 3 days ago. For as long as I could remember, she made it her absolute mission to remind me I was the difficult child, the ungrateful one, the daughter who ran away to build a career instead of playing my proper submissive role. Before I could even process the complex layers of grief, I felt the aggressive clacking of designer heels approaching. It was Iman, my 35-year-old sister. She practically floated across the room, clinging tightly to the arm of Carter Sterling. Carter was my ex-fiancé, the white heir to a massive real estate empire who broke our engagement 10 years ago to marry my sister. Vivian had engineered the entire betrayal, deciding Iman was much better suited to secure the sterling wealth than her stubborn, independent oldest daughter. Iman stopped right in front of me, deliberately blocking my path to the foyer. She made a theatrical show of adjusting her hair, making sure the light from the crystal chandelier hit her 5-carat diamond ring perfectly. "Poor Sienna," she said, her voice pitched just loud enough for Aunt Beatrice and Aunt Clara to hear. "Still alone at 38, hiding in the corner at our mother's repast. It breaks my heart, really. I tried to tell Mom you would come around eventually, but you know how she felt about your difficult lifestyle." From the corner of my eye, I saw Aunt Beatrice shake her head and whisper to Clara. She always was the bitter one, running off to play business instead of settling down to build a family. Iman stayed and did her duty. Iman smirked, feeding off their validation like she always did. She leaned in closer, the scent of her expensive floral perfume heavy in the air. "I know it hurts, Sienna, but you have to face reality. I got the man, the money, and now I have this mansion. Mom left the entire estate to me. It is time for you to pack up your things and go back to whatever lonely apartment you rent these days." I did not flinch. I did not shed a single tear. 10 years ago, her cruel words would have shattered me completely. 10 years ago, I would have screamed or begged or tried to prove my worth to a room full of people actively committed to misunderstanding me. Instead, I took a slow, deliberate sip of my bourbon, letting the burn ground me. I looked at Iman and then at Carter, who stood there with that familiar, arrogant smirk, relying entirely on his generational wealth and privilege to make him feel superior to me. "Is that so, Iman?" I asked, my voice perfectly calm and steady. "Well, before I leave, there is someone I would love for you to meet." I turned slightly toward the grand library doors. "Desmond, darling, could you come here for a moment?" The heavy oak doors opened, and Desmond stepped into the light. Desmond Pierce was not just a man, he was a force of nature. A self-made billionaire, a titan in corporate mergers and acquisitions, and the man who had shown me what actual unconditional love looked like. He wore a custom dark suit, moving with the quiet lethargy of a predator who already owned the room. As Desmond walked over, placing a protective and possessive hand on the small of my back, the entire dynamic of the room violently shifted. Carter stared at Desmond. All the blood drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost. The arrogant smirk vanished instantly, replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. The crystal Scotch glass slipped from his trembling fingers and crashed against the marble floor, sending amber liquid and sharp shards of glass everywhere. "Mr. Pierce," Carter stammered, his voice cracking in a pathetic way that made Iman jerk her head toward him in sheer confusion. "What are you doing here?" Desmond did not even look at the broken glass. He pressed a gentle kiss to my cheek before locking his dark, commanding eyes onto my ex-fiancé. "I am here supporting my wife, Carter Desmond," said his voice deep and smooth, sending a visible shiver down Carter's spine. "Beautiful ring your wife is wearing, by the way. Truly stunning." Iman puffed out her chest, attempting to regain her footing despite her husband's bizarre panic. "Of course it is," she snapped. "The Sterlings only buy the best." Desmond smiled, but it was a cold, calculated expression that made the surrounding gossiping aunties fall dead silent. "Is that what you call it?" Desmond asked, tilting his head. "The best. It is a terrible shame, Carter, that you had to drain the Sterling Employee Pension Fund to pay for that piece of jewelry right before filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy." The silence in the room was deafening. You could hear a pin drop. Iman whipped her head around, staring at Carter with wild, panicked eyes. "What is he talking about, Carter?" she shrieked, grabbing his expensive lapel. "What bankruptcy? What did you do with the money?" Carter was hyperventilating, backing away from Desmond, as if my husband were holding a loaded weapon. He could not speak, could not look at Iman, and certainly could not look at me. The golden child and her perfect wealthy husband were unraveling right in front of the very family members who had spent a decade praising them. And this was only the beginning of my reckoning. Carter shoved Iman away from him, his hands slick with cold sweat. "It is just a temporary restructuring," he stammered, adjusting his designer tie with trembling fingers. "A liquidity issue. Desmond is lying. My family has been building this city for 4 generations. We do not go bankrupt." Iman desperately wanted to believe him. She smoothed down her custom black dress, her eyes darting around the room at the whispering relatives. The golden facade was cracking, and she needed to seize control before the entire family realized she had married a fraud. She marched over to the grand mahogany table where the memorial guestbook sat and snatched her Birkin bag. Plunging her hand inside, she pulled out a thick, sealed manila envelope adorned with the golden crest of a prestigious Atlanta law firm. "Stop listening to her!" Iman shouted, waving the envelope in the air to command the attention of the room. "Sienna is just trying to ruin this day because she is bitter. She has always been jealous of me, and Mom knew it. That is why Mom made sure I would be protected from her greed." Iman ripped open the envelope and slammed a heavy stack of legal documents onto the table. "This is Vivian Pierce's final will and testament, signed and notarized 2 weeks before she died. She left everything to me. The cars, the jewelry, the bank accounts, and this $3 million estate. It all belongs to me now." Aunt Beatrice nodded in immediate agreement, stepping forward to stand shoulder to shoulder with my sister. "It is only right," she announced to the crowd. "Iman was the one who stayed here and did the hard work. Mom always knew you would abandon her, Sienna. You ran off to play venture capitalist and left your family behind. Iman stayed. She earned this house." Aunt Clara chimed in, murmuring her agreement while shooting me a look of pure disdain. "You should just leave, Sienna. Do not make a scene at your own mother's repast. You have caused this family enough embarrassment for one lifetime." Iman smiled triumphantly, her chest puffing out with renewed arrogant confidence. She snapped her fingers at the 2 private security guards standing by the front doors. "You heard my family," Iman ordered, her voice dripping with venom. "This is my property now. Escort Sienna and her husband off the premises immediately. If they resist, call the police and have them arrested for trespassing." The guards exchanged an uncertain look, but took a step forward. Carter stood taller, hiding behind his wife's sudden display of power. I did not move a single muscle. I looked at the fake will on the table, then at the enabling aunts who had spent my entire childhood convincing my mother that my independence was a disease. Then I threw my head back and let out a rich, genuine laugh that echoed off the high vaulted ceilings of the mansion. Iman's triumphant smile faltered. "What is so funny?" she demanded. I snapped my fingers. From the back of the room, my lead attorney, Marcus, a sharp-suited man carrying a sleek leather briefcase, stepped forward and joined me at the center table. I opened my clutch and pulled out a heavy set of brass keys along with a certified stamped property deed. I dropped them directly onto the casket spray floral arrangement resting next to her worthless stack of papers. "Mom could not leave you a house she did not own," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly calm pitch that made the entire room freeze. Iman stared at the keys. What are you talking about? She scoffed. Mom lived here until the day she died. Yes, she lived here, I replied, stepping closer so Iman could see the cold, hard truth in my eyes. But she did not own it. 4 years ago, while you were busy spending Carter's shrinking trust fund on European vacations, Mom took out massive secret loans to cover her underground gambling debts. She mortgaged this estate to the absolute limit. The bank foreclosed Iman. They were going to throw her out on the street and auction off the family legacy to the highest bidder. Aunt Beatrice gasped, clutching her chest. Vivian never said a word about any gambling debts, she whispered. Of course she did not. I shot back. She cared too much about what you hypocrites thought of her, so she came to me. The daughter she constantly belittled. I bought this entire estate in cash through a blind holding company. I let her stay here rent-free to protect her fragile ego and keep this family's precious reputation intact. But the title, the deed, the land you are standing on it belongs solely to my venture capital firm. Marcus opened his briefcase and laid the official tax records and the deed of trust right next to Iman's fake will. The name of my holding company was printed in bold black ink right at the top. Iman stared at the document, her hands shaking so violently she had to grip the edge of the table to keep from collapsing. You are lying, she gasped, her voice cracking. This cannot be real. It is very real, I said. Your will is useless. You own absolutely nothing. And since you were so eager to have security throw trespassers out of my house, let us put them to good use. I looked at my watch, then back at my sister. You have exactly 30 minutes to pack your designer bags and get out of my house, Iman. Carter, realizing that his wife possessed no assets to save his failing business, felt the last shred of his ego shatter. Cornered and humiliated by a successful black woman, he resorted to the only weapon he had left. His face twisted into a mask of pure, ugly rage as he stepped out from behind Iman. You think you can do this to us? He snarled, his voice echoing with generations of unchecked white privilege. You think because you have a little bit of money you can humiliate my family. My father plays golf with the Governor Sienna. My uncle is a federal judge. I will have your entire venture capital firm audited, investigated, and dismantled by Monday morning. I will make sure you and your arrogant husband never do business in this state again. You do not know who you are messing with. I stood completely unbothered by his outburst, watching him puff up his chest like a cornered animal. The threat was supposed to terrify me, but all it did was expose exactly how weak he truly was without his family name to protect him. Carter thought his connections could erase my hard work and bury my truth. He expected me to cower, to apologize, to shrink myself to fit into a space he could control. But I was not the naive girl he abandoned 10 years ago. I was a powerhouse, and I was about to show him exactly what happened when you threaten a queen in her own castle. Get your hands off me, Iman shrieked. Her shrill voice shattered whatever decorum was left in the grand living room. The two security guards who had previously stood by the doors now flanked her, grabbing her arms with firm professional grips. Iman thrashed wildly, her expensive black dress twisting around her legs. She dug her designer heels into the Persian rug, refusing to move. You cannot do this to me, she screamed at the guards. I am Iman Sterling. Do you know who my husband is? I will have you both fired. I will ruin your lives. The guards remained entirely unfazed. Ma, and please walk toward the exit or we will have to carry you, one of them stated, his voice devoid of any emotion. Carter watched his wife being dragged backward, and something inside him snapped. His face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. For a man who had never been told no in his entire life, being publicly humiliated by a black woman was a reality he simply could not process. He abandoned Iman, leaving her to struggle against the guards, and stormed directly toward me. He stopped mere inches from my face, trying to use his height to intimidate me. The scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the sour stench of his panic. You have made a massive mistake, Sienna, Carter hissed, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might shatter. You come back here waving a deed and throwing cash around like you are untouchable. But you are nothing. You are a glorified startup manager playing in a league you do not understand. I did not step back. I held my ground, meeting his furious gaze with absolute ice. I understand perfectly well, Carter, I replied. I understand that your family empire is drowning, and you are lashing out because you are powerless to stop it. Powerless Carter barked, a harsh, condescending laugh escaping his throat. He leaned in closer, lowering his voice, so only the people immediately surrounding us could hear the venom dripping from his words. My family practically built this state. My father plays golf with the governor. My uncle is a federal judge. We have senators on our payroll who can make a phone call and have your entire venture capital firm audited, investigated, and dismantled by Monday morning. I will freeze your assets. I will tie you up in endless litigation until you are bankrupt. I will make sure you and your arrogant husband are blacklisted from every country club and boardroom from Atlanta to New York. You think a deed to one house gives you power over me. I am a Sterling. We own the system you are just trying to rent a space in. His threats were designed to crush me, to remind me of the racial and economic hierarchy his family had weaponized for generations. But I just smiled. Your uncle, the judge, will be too busy dodging his own corruption scandals to help you, I said smoothly. Carter sneered, his eyes narrowing with a cruelty that transported me right back to the day he broke our engagement. You really have not changed at all, Sienna, he spat. You are exactly the same worthless, aggressive woman your mother warned us about. The mention of my mother made the air in the room turn suddenly thick. My Aunt Beatrice gasped, placing a hand over her mouth. What did you say? I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. Oh, you do not know. Carter smiled, a twisted, victorious expression crossing his face. He thought he had found my weak spot. He thought he had the ultimate weapon to break me. 10 years ago, your mother came to my parents' house crying. She begged them to let me marry Iman instead of you. She sat in our parlor and told my mother that you were too difficult, too stubborn, too focused on your own ambition to ever be a proper wife. Vivian promised my family that Iman would be docile, obedient, and willing to play the part. Your own mother sold you out, Sienna. She told my father that marrying you would be a disaster for our family image, and she practically handed Iman over to me on a silver platter just to secure a connection to the Sterling name. She hated you, Sienna. She threw you away to guarantee Iman a seat at our table. The room fell dead silent. The harsh truth of Vivian's ultimate betrayal hung in the air like poison. My own mother had actively orchestrated the destruction of my future to elevate her golden child. She had groveled before a white family, tearing down her oldest daughter just to proximity to their wealth. Carter watched my face, eagerly waiting for me to break down, waiting for the tears and the devastation. But the devastation never came. Instead, a slow, deliberate clapping broke the silence. Desmond stepped forward. He did not rush. He moved with a lethal, calculated grace, placing himself directly between me and Carter. Desmond was a head taller than Carter and built like a heavyweight champion, but it was the absolute predatory calm radiating from him that made Carter instantly take a step back. Desmond adjusted his cuffs, staring down at Carter as if he were looking at an insect on the bottom of his shoe. You have a very loud mouth for a man who is standing in my wife's living room. Desmond said, his voice a low rumble that commanded absolute authority. And you seem to have a severe misunderstanding of how power actually works in this city. Carter swallowed hard, trying to puff his chest back out. I know exactly how power works, Pierce. My family has been wielding it since before you were born. Desmond let out a soft, chilling chuckle. He reached into the inner pocket of his custom-tailored jacket and pulled out a sleek black leather folder. He tapped the folder against the palm of his hand, studying Carter with dark, merciless eyes. That is the problem with old money, Desmond said smoothly. You rely on what your grandfather built and forget to watch your own back. You get lazy. You get sloppy. You assume the system will always protect you because of your last name. Carter frowned, his eyes darting to the black folder. What is that? Desmond stepped completely into Carter's personal space, invading it so thoroughly that Carter bumped into the memorial table behind him. You might want to call your father before you threaten my wife again. Carter. Desmond said, his tone dropping to a deadly whisper that echoed clearly across the room. Because Pierce Capital just executed a hostile takeover. Carter froze, his breath hitching in his throat. Takeover, he stammered. We have been buying up your family's debt for 6 months, Desmond explained, sliding the black folder across the mahogany table until it hit Carter's chest. Your firm was bleeding cash and your board of directors was desperate. We quietly purchased 51% of sterling real estate on the open market this morning. The paperwork was finalized 10 minutes ago. Your father was just fired by the new board. You do not have a company anymore, Carter. You do not have a trust fund. You do not have senators on your payroll because you can no longer afford to pay them. Carter stared at the black folder as if it were a bomb. No, he gasped, shaking his head wildly. No, that is impossible. You cannot just buy my family. Desmond smiled a ruthless, terrifying smile. I just did. I own your company. I own your assets. And as of this morning, I own you. Now get out of my wife's house before I have you thrown out with the rest of the trash. The sharp, piercing ring of a cell phone shattered the dead silence of the living room. It was coming from Carter's designer jacket pocket. He flinched as if the sound itself had physically struck him. With trembling hands, he pulled out the device. The caller ID flashed brightly across the screen, and even from where I stood, I could see the name Arthur Sterling. Carter swiped to answer, bringing the phone to his ear with slow, jerky movements. He did not even get a chance to say hello. The frantic, furious screaming of his father bled through the receiver, echoing thinly across the quiet room. The elder Sterling was howling about locked security badges, frozen corporate accounts, and board members being escorted out of the glass building downtown by armed security. Carter stared blankly into space, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. The phone slipped from his sweat-slicked fingers, hitting the marble floor with a sharp crack that shattered the screen. The voice of his father continued to yell from the damaged speaker on the floor until the line abruptly went dead. The transition was immediate and absolute. The towering, arrogant heir who had just threatened to destroy my life, with his white privilege folded in on himself. His shoulders collapsed, his chest caved, and his knees gave out completely. Carter dropped to the floor, landing hard on the Persian rug right at Desmond's feet. The same man who had sneered at my black relatives, who had paraded his wealth as a weapon, was now kneeling before a black man begging for his corporate life. Please, Carter gasped, his voice a high-pitched whine that stripped him of whatever dignity he had left. Please, Mr. Pierce, you cannot do this. My family built that company from the ground up. It is our legacy. You cannot just take it away from us. We will lose everything. The estates, the trusts, the properties. Desmond looked down at him with an expression carved from granite. He did not show a single ounce of pity. Your legacy. Desmond stated, his voice reverberating with a dark, terrifying power. Let us talk about your legacy, Carter. Let us talk about the East Side developments. Let us talk about the West End housing initiatives. For 4 generations, the Sterling family empire was built on redlining black neighborhoods, pushing out black business owners, and gentrifying our communities for your own profit. You priced out families who had lived there for decades. You bought up distressed properties for pennies on the dollar by bribing city officials to deny loans to black developers. You built your entire fortune on the backs of the exact same people you came into this house today to look down upon. Desmond leaned forward slightly, his dark eyes piercing through Carter. One of those neighborhoods you gentrified was the very same project where I grew up. So this hostile takeover is not just business, Carter. It is poetic justice. I did not just buy your company to expand my portfolio. I bought it to gut it from the inside out and return that land to the people your father stole it from. The aunties who had spent the entire morning fawning over Carter, treating him like a white savior who had graced our family with his presence, now stared at him in utter disgust. Aunt Beatrice actually took a step back, pulling her black dress away, as if being near him might infect her with his failure. The room was watching a so-called king be stripped of his crown, and the reality of his powerlessness was intoxicating. Iman stood frozen near the casket spray, her eyes darting frantically from the broken phone on the floor to her husband groveling on his knees. The realization hit her like a freight train. The limitless bank accounts, the private jets, the country club memberships, the protective shield of white wealth she had sold her soul to acquire were gone. They were completely erased in the span of 5 minutes. The designer dress she wore and the 5-carat diamond ring on her finger were now just artifacts of a bankrupt empire. A visceral, ugly rage warped Iman's beautiful features. She did not rush to comfort her husband. She did not drop to the floor to support the man she had stolen from me 10 years ago. Instead, she lunged at him. She grabbed Carter by the lapels of his ruined suit and yanked him backward. "Get up!" she screamed, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. "Get up, you pathetic loser! Do something! Call your uncle! Call the governor! Fix this right now!" Carter looked up at her, his eyes red and weeping. "I cannot, Iman. He bought the majority shares. It is over. We have nothing left. We are broke." The word broke triggered something feral in my sister. She raised her hand and delivered a vicious ringing slap directly across Carter's face. The crack echoed sharply, making several relatives gasp. "You useless coward!" Iman shrieked, standing over him, her chest heaving. "I gave up everything for this lifestyle. I played the dutiful little society wife to your racist mother. I endured those horrible country club dinners where your family treated me like a token accessory. I did all of that for the money, Carter. And you let some venture capitalist walk in and take it all away. You are a failure. You are nothing but a weak, pathetic failure." She kicked him, pushing him away as he tried to grab her hand. Iman was hyperventilating, her carefully crafted golden child persona entirely shattered. She was backed into a corner, stripped of her wealth, stripped of her mansion, and stripped of the maternal protection Vivian had always provided. She looked around the room, seeing the faces of our relatives looking at her, not with envy anymore, but with pity and shock. Then her wild, desperate eyes locked onto me. I was standing there perfectly composed, anchored by a billionaire husband who worshipped the ground I walked on. I had won, and she could not stomach the taste of her own defeat. "You think you have won?" Iman hissed, her voice trembling with a dark, spiteful energy. "You think you are so perfect standing there in your designer suit, acting like you are completely untouchable. You think you beat me today, Sienna." I tilted my head, watching her self-destruct. "I already beat you, Iman. You just brought the receipt." Iman let out a harsh, jagged laugh that sounded completely unhinged. She pointed a shaking, manicured finger directly at Desmond, then shifted it to me. "Your husband looks at you like you are a queen," Iman spat. "But you are a liar, Sienna. A cold-blooded liar. You think Desmond would love you if he knew the real truth about your past. You think he would look at you with such devotion if he knew exactly why Carter really left you at the altar 10 years ago." Carter scrambled backward on the floor, his eyes widening in terror. "Iman, no," he choked out, raising a hand to stop her. "Do not do this." "Shut up," Iman screamed at him before snapping her burning gaze back to me. "Shall I tell him, Sienna? Shall I tell your perfect billionaire husband about the baby?" The sudden shift in the room was palpable, with the sterling empire crumbling and Carter groveling on the floor like a broken man. Iman realized her entire social standing had evaporated in a matter of minutes. Stripped of her wealth and her husband's prestige, she refused to go down quietly. Her eyes darted around the opulent living room, frantically searching for any weapon left in her arsenal to humiliate me and reclaim her upper hand. Her expression twisted into a desperate, vindictive sneer. Iman unclipped her designer handbag, plunged her hand inside, and yanked out a crumpled, yellowed folder. She waved it triumphantly in the air, her voice rising to a shrill pitch that cut through the heavy silence of the room. "You all think Sienna is so virtuous," she announced, turning to face the shocked relatives and aunties who were still trying to process the corporate hostile takeover. "You think she is the victim here. Let me tell you why Carter really left her 10 years ago." Aunt Beatrice gasped, clutching her pearls. Aunt Clara leaned forward, her eyes wide with malicious curiosity. Iman opened the folder, holding up a collection of papers that looked like old hospital documents. 10 years ago, right before our wedding, Sienna secretly aborted Carter's baby. Iman declared, the lie dripping from her tongue like poison. She cared more about her startup ambitions and her precious career than about starting a family. Mom found out about it, showed the medical records to Carter, and told him the truth about her cold heart. That is why Carter broke off the engagement. That is why he sought comfort and real love in my arms. A collective murmur rippled through the gathering. The relatives looked at me with a mix of shock and moral judgment, falling right back into their old habit of believing the worst of me. Carter, sensing a lifeline to salvage his shattered ego, scrambled up from his knees. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, adjusted his ruined collar, and immediately leaned into the narrative. He looked directly at Desmond, playing the wounded, betrayed victim with a pathetic sigh. She is a cold-blooded monster, Carter said, pointing a trembling finger at me as he tried to poison my marriage. She killed my child Desmond. I tried to build a life with her, but she threw our baby away like trash. I had no choice but to walk away from her. You have no idea what kind of woman you married, Pierce. The room held its breath. Every eye locked onto me, waiting for me to shatter under the weight of the accusation. They expected tears. They expected defensiveness. They expected me to cower just like I used to a decade ago, when my mother and sister ganged up on me. I did not flinch. I did not drop my gaze. Beside me, Desmond did not look disgusted or betrayed at all. He actually looked deeply bored, as if he were watching a very poorly acted, low-budget soap opera. He casually adjusted his cuffs and let out a soft, amused sigh. I always wondered when you would finally try to use that forged file, Iman, I said, my voice cutting through the tension with absolute calm. Iman stuttered, her triumphant smirk faltering for a split second. What do you mean forged? It is right here. It is a terrible forgery, actually, I replied, stepping forward. Good thing I found Mom's secret iCloud backups and physical storage boxes while clearing out her medical and debt records last month. Mom kept meticulous notes on every single scheme you two pulled. I reached into my designer leather tote bag, pulled out a sleek black USB drive, and walked over to the wall-mounted smart television system. With practiced ease, I plugged the drive into the side port. The massive screen flickered to life, bypassing the cable channels to display a digital archive of audio recordings, text transcripts, and high-resolution scanned documents. Let us listen to what really happened in 2016, I said, clicking the play button on the remote. The high-definition speakers embedded in the ceiling cracked to life. A sharp burst of static echoed through the grand living room, followed immediately by the unmistakable shrill voice of my mother. Vivian's voice rang out with a vicious clarity that made everyone in the room flinch. "You stupid, careless girl," Vivian screamed through the speakers. Her tone was dripping with absolute disgust. "Do you have any idea what you have done, Iman? You are pregnant by a street-corner drug dealer, a thug who sells pills outside the liquor store. You think the Sterlings are going to let their golden boy marry into our family if they find out you are carrying a hoodlum's bastard." The sound of Iman sobbing uncontrollably filled the background of the recording. "I did not mean to, Mom," Iman wailed through the speakers, her voice thick with panic. "It was just a mistake. Please, you have to help me. Carter is going to propose to Sienna next week. He bought the ring. If he finds out I am pregnant by someone else, he will never look at me again." Iman lunged toward the smart television in the present moment, her face a mask of pure terror. "Turn it off!" she shrieked, scrambling for the remote in my hand. "Turn it off right now, Sienna." Desmond simply shifted his weight, blocking her path with a wall of solid muscle. He did not say a word, but the lethal warning in his dark eyes made Iman freeze in her tracks. She stumbled backward, trapped in the absolute nightmare of her own making. The recording continued to play, exposing every rotten layer of their conspiracy. "Stop crying and listen to me," Vivian commanded on the tape. "We are going to fix this. We are going to the clinic downtown right now. I know a nurse there. I have already paid her $10,000 in cash to keep her mouth shut. She is going to perform the procedure, and she is going to put the entire medical file under Sienna's name." "But Sienna is not even pregnant," Iman sniffled. "Why use her name?" "Because, you foolish girl," Vivian snapped back, her voice cold and calculating. "Sienna is too independent. She does not need the Sterlings. She is going to build her own company and leave us behind. I will not let her walk away with a billionaire heir while you end up with absolutely nothing. We use Sienna's name on the abortion record. Then I take that file directly to Carter's racist mother. I will tell Mrs. Sterling that Sienna aborted Carter's baby because she cares more about her venture capital startup than his legacy. The Sterlings are terrified of a black scandal hitting the elite press. When Carter's heart is broken, you will be right there to comfort him. He will drop Sienna in a heartbeat and marry you just to save face." The audio clicked and went dead. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Every single relative who had spent the last decade praising Iman and condemning me now stared at the floor, entirely speechless. Aunt Beatrice looked physically ill. The pristine image of her favorite sister Vivian had just been burned to ash in front of her eyes. My mother had not just favored Iman, she had actively maliciously engineered the destruction of my future to secure a wealthy white son-in-law for the daughter she deemed worthy. Carter stood frozen in the center of the room. The blood had completely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly translucent shade of gray. His chest heaved as he struggled to pull air into his lungs. The reality of his entire adult life was crashing down around him. For 10 years he had walked around with his chest puffed out, believing he had made the righteous choice. He had played the wounded martyr, convincing himself that I was a cold-blooded monster who had murdered his unborn child. He had justified his betrayal, his arrogance, and his marriage to Iman, based on a lie so profound it had entirely rewritten his destiny. He slowly turned his head to look at Iman. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and filled with a horror that bordered on madness. Carter, Iman whispered, her voice trembling as she reached a shaking hand out to him. Carter, please, you have to understand. I loved you. I did it because I loved you. You loved my money. Carter gasped, stepping back from her as if she were carrying a plague. You loved my family name. You aborted a drug dealer's baby and blamed it on the only woman I ever actually loved. Carter looked at me then. For the first time in 10 years, the smug superiority was completely gone. In its place was a crushing, agonizing realization. He had thrown away a woman who was building an empire, a woman who had never lied to him, to marry a desperate social climber who had played him for a fool. He had lost everything: his company, his fortune, and his true partner, all because he was too weak to question a forged piece of paper handed to him by a manipulative mother-in-law. He realized he had been nothing but a pawn in Vivian's twisted game of wealth acquisition. The emasculation was total. Stripped of his corporate power by Desmond, and stripped of his personal pride by Iman, Carter snapped. A raw, guttural roar tore from his throat. It was the sound of a man losing his mind. He lunged forward, his hands wrapping violently around Iman's throat. They crashed into the memorial display, sending flowers and framed photos of Vivian scattering across the marble floor. Iman choked and clawed at his hands, her designer heels kicking wildly against the ground as Carter squeezed harder, pinning her down. Desmond's guards ripped him off. "I will destroy you, Iman," he screamed. "I am draining our joint accounts." Carter scrambled backward, his hands shaking so violently he could barely grip the shattered remains of his cell phone. When the cracked screen refused to respond, he lunged toward the memorial table and snatched up Iman's designer handbag. He ripped it open, dumping expensive cosmetics and a gold-plated tablet onto the marble floor. "My accounts," he muttered, his breath coming in ragged, panicked gasps. "I am freezing everything right now. You get nothing, Iman, not a single cent." He frantically tapped his password into the banking application, his eyes wide and unblinking. The relatives in the room held their collective breath, watching the once powerful heir reduced to a frantic mess on the floor. Then a sound cut through the heavy tension of the room. It started as a low wheeze and quickly escalated into a sharp, grating laugh. Iman pushed herself up onto her elbows, her chest heaving as she coughed. A thin trickle of bright red blood ran from the corner of her lip where Carter had grabbed her. She wiped it away with the back of her hand, smearing it across her flawless makeup. Her laughter grew louder, echoing off the vaulted ceiling, sounding entirely manic and unhinged. "You are going to drain the accounts!" "Carter," she gasped, pushing her hair out of her face. "That is hilarious, truly hilarious. Tell me, what exactly are you planning to drain?" Carter stared at the glowing screen of the tablet. The blood drained completely from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse. He tapped the screen again and again, his finger jabbing at the glass hard enough to crack it further. "No," he whispered, the word catching in his throat. "No, that is impossible. The trust account had $12 million in it yesterday. The operating fund had 8. Where is it? Where is the money, Iman?" Iman pushed herself to her feet, swaying slightly before finding her balance. She looked down at him with an expression of absolute, undisguised disgust. "It is gone, Carter. It has been gone for weeks. I moved the last of it this morning while you were busy picking out which custom suit to wear to my mother's funeral." Carter scrambled to his feet, holding the tablet out as if it were a shield. "You stole it!" he shrieked. "You stole my family's money. I will have you arrested. I will have you thrown in a cell for the rest of your pathetic life. Iman took a step forward, closing the distance between them. Her fear was entirely gone, replaced by the vicious survival instinct that Vivian had beaten into her since childhood. You really thought I was just some obedient, grateful black wife thrilled to accept whatever crumbs your racist family threw my way, Iman snarled. You thought you could parade me around your country club dinners like a trophy to prove how progressive you were while your mother made snide comments about my hair and my background. You walked around with your unbearable white superiority, believing you were always the smartest person in the room just because your last name was Sterling. But you were stupid, Carter. You were so incredibly arrogant and stupid. Aunt Beatrice gasped, covering her mouth, but Iman did not even glance at our relatives. She kept her venomous gaze locked on her husband. I knew your company was failing 6 months ago, she continued, her voice dripping with malice. I saw the delinquency notices you tried to hide in your home office. I knew the board was going to oust your father, so I made sure I was protected. Every night you poured yourself 3 glasses of Macallan and complained about how hard your life was. I was sliding wire transfer authorization forms under your nose. You signed blank documents without even reading them because you were too drunk and too arrogant to think a woman like me could outsmart a man like you. That money is sitting in an offshore account in the Cayman Islands right now, under a shell company you cannot touch. I took everything, Carter. I secured my future. Carter looked as though he might be sick. He stumbled backward, hitting the grand piano. He had lost his company to my husband and his personal fortune to his wife, all in the span of 20 minutes. His chest heaved as his mind desperately searched for a way out, a loophole, a lifeline. Then his manic eyes snapped toward me. Sienna, he gasped, rushing forward but stopping abruptly when Desmond took a single menacing step toward him. Carter raised his hands in a placating gesture, his eyes pleading with me. Sienna, listen to me. She stole my money. She stole millions of dollars. You have a venture capital firm. You have a team of corporate lawyers. You have to help me get it back. I stared at him in utter disbelief. You want me to help you? I asked, my tone dangerously flat. You owe me, Carter shouted, his desperation making him reckless. You orchestrated this hostile takeover. You and your husband stole my family's empire. You orchestrated this entire humiliation today. The least you can do is have your legal team freeze her offshore accounts. If you do not help me, I will sue you, Sienna. I will sue your firm for corporate espionage. I will tell the press that Pierce Capital used illegal tactics to manipulate the stock price before the takeover. I will drag your company through the mud until you lose everything too. The sheer audacity of his threat was staggering. He was a drowning man trying to pull the rescue boat under the water with him. I looked at Carter, then at Iman, who was standing with her chin raised, still believing she had somehow won the ultimate prize. I smiled warmly at Carter, feeling the absolute power of the moment settle in my bones. Oh, Carter, I said, my voice soft but carrying clearly across the silent room. You cannot sue anyone. You cannot hire a lawyer. And you certainly cannot tell the press anything about my company. Why not? He demanded, his voice cracking. I nodded toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows facing the front circular driveway of the estate. The flashing red and blue lights were already visible through the sheer curtains reflecting off the crystal chandeliers inside. Because the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation are walking up the driveway right now, I informed him. My smile widened as the sound of heavy boots hitting the front porch echoed through the foyer. You see, Iman, when I found Mom's files, I did not just find the medical records. I also found the digital trail of your offshore wire transfers. Mom was keeping tabs on your little Cayman Islands project just in case she ever needed to use it against you. I forwarded every single routing number and forged signature to the federal authorities yesterday morning. Iman's face went completely slack. The color vanished from her cheeks, leaving her looking like a wax statue. No, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Yes, I replied, stepping closer to the 2 people who had destroyed my 20s. Carter, you are going down for massive corporate fraud and embezzlement of the employee pension fund. And Iman, you are going down for international wire fraud and grand larceny. You are not going to Europe. You are not going to a country club. You are both going to federal prison. Red and blue lights suddenly painted the massive bay windows of the living room, sweeping across the expensive artwork and the horrified faces of my family. The sharp wail of approaching sirens cut through the heavy silence of the estate. Iman snapped her head toward the glass, her meticulously styled hair falling wildly across her face. The reality of the flashing lights broke whatever fragile thread of sanity she had left holding her together. There was no more white privilege to hide behind. There was no more stolen wealth to buy her way out of consequences. She was trapped. A guttural animalistic scream ripped from Iman's throat. She lunged blindly toward the nearest table where a massive baccarat crystal vase sat filled with white lilies for our mother's repast. With a violent swipe of her arm, she sent the vase crashing to the marble floor. It shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces, sending water and crushed petals everywhere. Before anyone could react, Iman dropped to her knees and snatched up a massive razor-sharp shard of crystal. Aunt Beatrice, who had been standing paralyzed near the table, let out a terrified shriek as Iman grabbed her by the collar of her black mourning dress. Iman yanked the older woman backward, pinning her against her chest, and pressed the jagged edge of the crystal directly against Beatrice's throat. "Nobody move!" Iman shrieked, her eyes wide and completely unhinged. The manic energy rolling off her was terrifying. "I will kill her. I swear to God I will cut her right here. Get back. All of you get back." The room erupted into pure chaos. The other aunts and cousins scrambled backward, knocking over chairs in their desperate rush to get away. Carter, who had just been crying on the floor, crawled backward like a coward, pressing himself against the far wall and covering his head. Desmond immediately stepped in front of me, his hand reaching toward his waistband where his security team carried their weapons, but I placed a firm hand on his arm to stop him. Iman was breathing heavily, the crystal trembling against Aunt Beatrice's skin. A thin line of blood appeared where the sharp edge pressed too hard, causing Beatrice to sob uncontrollably. "Please, Iman." Beatrice begged, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. "I have always been on your side. I always supported you." "Shut up," Iman spat, her voice cracking with a hysterical edge. "You never supported me. None of you did. You only supported the money I brought into this house. You only praised me when I married the rich white heir and elevated your social status. You think I do not know that? You think I did not hear you all whispering behind my back when I first brought Carter around?" Iman glared at me, her chest heaving as she projected a lifetime of deep-seated inadequacy onto the room. "You think you had it so bad, Sienna. You think you were the victim because Mom cast you out. You were the lucky one. You got to leave. You got to build your own life away from her toxic grasp. Do you have any idea what it took to be her golden child? Do you have any idea what she demanded of me?" Iman's voice broke, shifting from rage to a pathetic, shattered sob. "Mom never actually loved me. She just loved the lifestyle I could provide. She loved the country club memberships and the designer bags I bought her with Carter's money. Every single day I had to play the perfect submissive wife to a man who looked down on me, just to keep the money flowing. Every day I had to listen to Mom tell me I was nothing without the sterling name. I aborted my own child for her. I sold my soul for her. And she still looked at me like I was just a paycheck. You escaped, Sienna. I was the one trapped in this nightmare." The raw, pathetic truth of her confession hung in the flashing red and blue light of the living room. Iman was not a mastermind. She was a deeply broken, severely insecure woman who had destroyed her entire life, trying to buy the affection of a mother who was fundamentally incapable of love. Aunt Beatrice whimpered again, but I did not back away. I stepped out from behind Desmond, moving slowly and deliberately toward my sister. I did not show an ounce of fear. I did not raise my voice. I used the absolute psychological advantage I had built over the last 10 years to dismantle her remaining defenses. "You are pathetic, Iman," I said, my voice dropping to a cold, calculating tone that sliced right through her hysteria. "Look at you. You have a hostage in a house you do not own, surrounded by police. You cannot bribe, fighting for a legacy that never actually existed. You did not sell your soul for Mom. You sold it because you were too lazy and too cowardly to build your own empire." I took another slow step forward, keeping my eyes locked dead onto hers. "You want to blame Mom for your choices? Fine. But Mom is dead. The Sterlings are bankrupt. And you are standing in my living room holding a piece of broken glass like a desperate cornered rat. Do you really think cutting Aunt Beatrice is going to stop the FBI from walking through those front doors? Do you think bleeding on my marble floor changes the fact that you are going to spend the next 20 years in a federal prison cell wearing an orange jumpsuit? Iman's breathing grew shallow. Her eyes darted wildly, searching for an exit, a lie, an excuse, anything to cling to. But I gave her nothing. Drop the glass, Iman. I commanded, my voice echoing with absolute unyielding authority. You have lost. It is over. The hard truth finally shattered her fragile ego. A wretched sob tore from her throat. Her hand trembled violently, and the jagged shard of crystal slipped from her fingers, hitting the floor with a dull clink. Aunt Beatrice immediately collapsed to the ground, crawling away in pure terror. For a fraction of a second, I thought the confrontation was finished. But the psychotic desperation in my sister's eyes simply shifted into something far more dangerous. Iman was not reaching for surrender. She was reaching into the designer handbag she had dropped on the floor. Before anyone could react, she whipped her hand back up, pulling a sleek black handgun from the depths of her purse. She bypassed me entirely and pointed the barrel directly at Desmond's chest. Her finger gripped the trigger, her face twisted into a mask of pure venomous hatred. If I cannot have a billionaire husband, neither can you. The cold black steel of the barrel was leveled directly at Desmond's chest, but my body moved before my brain could even process the threat. I threw myself forward, determined to place myself between the bullet and the man who had given me the world. But Desmond was faster. With a fluid, effortless motion, he gripped my waist and pushed me firmly behind his broad shoulders, shielding me completely from my sister's psychotic breakdown. He did not raise his hands. He did not beg for his life like Carter had done just moments before. Desmond stood perfectly still, staring down the barrel of the gun with the absolute chilling calm of a man who had faced death long before he ever wore a bespoke suit. He radiated a dangerous, unyielding energy that instantly shrunk the space Iman occupied. "Man, you do not know how to hold that weapon," Desmond said, his voice a low, steady rumble that vibrated through the silent room. "Your grip is too high on the backstrap and your finger is shaking on the trigger. If you pull it, the recoil is going to snap your fragile wrist before the bullet even reaches me. You bought that gun to feel safe, but you have no idea what it actually takes to pull the trigger." "Shut up," Iman screamed, waving the gun wildly. "Shut up! You ruined my life. You took my company. You took my husband's money. I will kill you. I will kill both of you right now and end this." Desmond let out a soft, dismissive scoff. He took a slow, deliberate step toward her. The aunties huddled in the corner whimpered, pressing themselves against the antique wallpaper. But Desmond kept his eyes locked on Iman, treating her like a petulant child, throwing a tantrum rather than an armed, deadly threat. "I grew up in the projects on the south side." Iman, Desmond said, his voice cutting cleanly through the wail of the approaching police sirens outside. "Before I ever touched $1 billion, before I ever walked into a corporate boardroom, I survived streets where people pulled triggers without hesitating for a fraction of a second. I have looked real killers in the eye, people who had absolutely nothing to lose and nowhere to go. You are not a killer, Iman. You are just a spoiled, desperate woman who bought a handgun to feel powerful because your husband's bank accounts finally ran dry and your mother is not here to protect you anymore." "I am not afraid to pull this trigger!" she shrieked, her chest heaving as she backed away from his relentless advance. Her designer shoes slipped slightly on the spilled water and crushed lilies from the broken vase. "Then do it," Desmond challenged, taking another calculated, heavy step forward. "But before you do, let me explain exactly what happens next. You are not going to a country club prison for white-collar crimes anymore. You just took hostages. You just aimed a loaded firearm at an unarmed man in front of a dozen witnesses. You are going to a maximum security federal lockdown. Do you know what happens to women like you in federal lockdown, Iman? Women who have spent their entire adult lives hiding behind a white man's wealth and a fake persona." Iman swallowed hard, the gun trembling violently in her sweaty grip. Her eyes darted toward the flashing red and blue lights painting the living room windows. The sirens were deafening now right outside the front gates, and the heavy crunch of tires on gravel signaled the arrival of multiple armored vehicles. "There are no stylists in federal lockdown," Desmond continued, methodically stripping away the last remnants of her fragile ego. There are no silk sheets, no catered repasts, and no private drivers. The women in those concrete cells do not care about your designer shoes or the Sterling family name. They are going to look at you and see exactly what you are. A weak, terrified fraud who sold out her own sister for a lifestyle she could not even maintain. You will not last a single week in there before they break whatever is left of your mind. You will be nothing. Stop it, Iman wailed, pressing her free hand against her temple. Her carefully constructed reality was collapsing entirely. The illusion of her superiority, the protection of her mother, the safety of her stolen wealth, all of it was gone. She was staring at the absolute destruction of her life, and Desmond was forcing her to look at the ugly truth of her own reflection. She was nothing without the lies she had spun. "You drop that gun right now!" Desmond ordered, his voice booming with sudden terrifying authority that shook the room. "Or I promise you I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never see the outside of a concrete cell." Before Iman could make another sound, a massive crash shook the foundation of the estate. The heavy, solid wood front doors were violently kicked open, splintering the doorframe into pieces. A tactical SWAT team swarmed into the grand foyer, heavily armed and moving with synchronized lethal precision. The room was instantly filled with the harsh, blinding glare of tactical flashlights and the sharp, aggressive shouts of federal agents locking down the perimeter. "Drop the weapon! Drop the weapon right now!" A dozen red laser sights cut through the dusty air of the living room, pinning Iman like a trapped animal. The bright red dots danced across her chest and forehead, marking her for immediate termination if she made a single wrong move. The sheer, overwhelming terror of the tactical raid broke her completely. Iman gasped a wretched, pathetic sound and released the gun. It hit the marble floor with a heavy metallic clack, sliding harmlessly toward the grand piano. "Get down on the ground!" an agent roared, closing the distance between them with his rifle raised. But Iman did not freeze. She did not surrender quietly. With the lethal threat neutralized, her deeply ingrained survival instinct kicked back in. The instinct Vivian had nurtured since childhood. The ability to manipulate the narrative and play the victim at a moment's notice, regardless of the destruction she caused. Iman dropped to her knees, but not in submission. She collapsed into a theatrical, perfectly executed display of weeping hysterics. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing loudly as the federal agents surrounded her. She looked up through her tears, her eyes wide and brimming with fabricated innocence. She ignored the heavily armed agents, ignored Carter cowering in the corner, and pointed a shaking accusatory finger directly at me. "Do not arrest me!" Iman cried out, her voice dripping with manufactured terror. "You have to arrest her. Sienna is the one you want. She is a monster." The tactical team hesitated for a fraction of a second, keeping their weapons trained on Iman, as the lead detective stepped into the chaotic room. "Arrest her!" Iman screamed louder, throwing her whole body into the performance. "Sienna is the one who murdered our mother. She poisoned her. She killed her for the inheritance, and she just tried to kill me to cover it up." The accusation hung in the air, freezing the room in a state of absolute shock. The tactical agents kept their weapons lowered, but their stances rigid, their eyes darting between my sister and me. The grand living room, already a disaster zone of crushed lilies, broken glass and spilled water, suddenly felt like a courtroom. Aunt Beatrice let out a loud theatrical gasp, clutching the collar of her black mourning dress. She turned to Aunt Clara, her voice a harsh whisper that carried perfectly across the silent room. "She did die very suddenly," Beatrice muttered. "Vivian was perfectly healthy last week. She was just at my house for Sunday dinner complaining about Sienna disrespecting the family." Clara nodded vigorously, her eyes narrowing as she looked at me with renewed suspicion. "It is true," Clara added. "Sienna always hated her. We all know Sienna held a grudge since the day she left this house. She wanted to punish Vivian. It makes perfect sense that she would do something so horrible to get her revenge on all of us." Iman saw the doubt festering among our relatives and seized the opening like a starving predator. She pushed herself up from the marble floor, her tears flowing with the precision of a seasoned actress. She looked at the lead detective, a tall, broad-shouldered police captain with sharp gray eyes, who had just stepped through the shattered front doors. "Captain, you have to listen to me." Iman sobbed, her voice trembling with perfect vulnerability. Sienna came to see Mom the night before she died. I saw her luxury car pulling out of the driveway. They were arguing violently over the deed to this mansion. Mom called me crying, saying Sienna was demanding she sign over the estate, or she would leave her with absolutely nothing. Iman took a shaky step forward, pointing a manicured finger at me. Sienna has access to all of Mom's medications. Iman continued, her voice breaking exactly at the right moments. She knows Mom takes blood pressure pills. Sienna went into her bathroom that night. I know she did. She swapped the pills. She gave Mom something else to trigger a massive heart attack because she wanted to steal the family legacy before Carter and I could protect it. She just admitted she bought the house in secret. She needed Mom dead to take full control and sell the land out from under us. She has been plotting this takeover for years, just waiting for the perfect moment to strike when we were all grieving and vulnerable. The performance was terrifyingly brilliant. If I did not know the absolute truth, I might have believed her myself. She wove facts with fiction so seamlessly that the lie became a suffocating web. She weaponized my financial independence, my strained relationship with our mother, and my unannounced visit last week into a clear motive for cold-blooded murder. Carter, still cowering by the wall, nodded enthusiastically, eager to throw me to the wolves if it meant saving his own skin from federal prison. She is ruthless, Carter chimed in, his voice shaking as he pointed at me. Sienna destroys everything she touches. She planned all of this to ruin us and take everything for herself. The police captain listened in total silence. He looked at the crying, trembling woman on the floor, then turned his sharp gray eyes directly toward me. The heavy silence stretched, pulling the tension in the room taut. Desmond stood right beside me, his jaw clenched tight. His body was tense, radiating a lethal protective energy, ready to tear the room apart if a single officer laid a hand on me. But I placed a calming, gentle hand on my husband's arm. I did not break eye contact with the captain. I did not scramble to defend myself. I knew exactly why the police were here, and it had absolutely nothing to do with me poisoning anyone. My conscience was perfectly clear, and my legal team had already provided the authorities with every single piece of undeniable evidence they needed to secure this arrest. The captain took a slow, deliberate step forward. His heavy boots crunched loudly on the broken crystals scattered across the floor. He walked straight toward me, his face an unreadable mask of authority. Aunt Beatrice let out a self-righteous sigh of relief, fully expecting to see the prodigal, difficult daughter finally led away in handcuffs in front of the entire family. Iman wiped a single tear from her cheek, a ghost of a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. She thought she had done it. She truly thought she had successfully manipulated the entire justice system one last time to completely destroy my life and walk away a spotless victim. She believed her golden child status could shield her even from a federal tactical raid. But the captain did not stop in front of me. He walked right past me, not even giving me a single second glance. He marched directly up to my sister. Before Iman could even begin to process what was happening, the captain grabbed her wrist, spun her around roughly, and slammed heavy cold steel handcuffs onto her wrists with a sharp, definitive click. Iman shrieked, thrashing violently against the captain's iron grip. "What are you doing?" she screamed, her fake tears vanishing instantly into genuine raw panic. "Get your hands off of me right now. I am the victim here. Arrest her. You absolutely have the wrong person. You are ruining my mother's funeral. I am a Sterling. You cannot touch me." The captain yanked her arms up, forcing her to stand still. "Iman Sterling, you are under arrest for elder abuse, wire fraud, and manslaughter," the captain announced, his voice booming over her frantic, desperate protests. "We already have the toxicology report. Your mother did not die of a heart attack. She died of a stress-induced stroke after someone drained her life support fund and canceled her medical insurance. And we know it was you." Iman thrashes wildly against the cold steel, biting into her wrists. She twists and kicks, trying to break free from the captain's unyielding grip, her designer heels slipping on the wet marble and crushed lilies. She screams that it is a lie, a setup, a frame job, orchestrated by me. The tactical agents do not flinch, forming a tight circle around her, their expressions hardened against her theatrical display. I step forward, closing the distance between us. The air in the room is thick with tension. Desmond remains a steady, powerful presence just behind my shoulder, allowing me to deliver the final crushing blow myself. I reach into my leather tote bag one last time and pull out a thick stack of bank statements printed on crisp white paper. I hold them up high so the entire room, especially Aunt Beatrice and Aunt Clara, can clearly see the undeniable proof of their golden child's depravity. Let me tell you exactly how devoted my sister was to our mother. I say, my voice ringing out with absolute clarity, cutting through Iman's hysterical sobbing. 6 months ago, Mom was diagnosed with a severe arterial blockage. Her doctors told her she needed an experimental heart surgery, a highly specialized procedure that cost $200,000 out of pocket. It was not covered by her standard insurance, and because Carter's family empire was already secretly bleeding cash, there was absolutely no sterling money available to save her. I looked directly at Aunt Beatrice, whose face is now a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. I went to Mom the night before she died. I continue revealing the truth behind Iman's fabricated story. I did not go there to argue over the deed to this house. I went there to hand her a certified cashier's check for $200,000 to pay for her surgery entirely in full. I offered to save her life. But Mom, in her infinite pride and delusion, laughed right in my face. She shoved my check back across the table. She told me to take my dirty venture capital money and leave because her perfect daughter Iman was already handling it. Iman stopped struggling, her chest heaving as the color completely drains from her face. She stares at the bank records in my hand, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it almost looks like paralysis. Iman was handling it all right, I say, my gaze shifting back to my sister, holding her captive with the weight of her own sins. But not the way Mom thought. Iman convinced Mom that in order to liquidate assets quickly for the surgery, she needed to sign a comprehensive power of attorney. Mom trusted you implicitly, Iman. She signed over complete control of her finances, her healthcare directives, and her life insurance policy. The room is so quiet, you can hear the heavy breathing of the tactical team. I step closer, my voice dropping to a sharp, lethal edge. But you did not pay the hospital, did you, Iman? You took that power of attorney and contacted Mom's life insurance provider. You executed a living benefits clause and completely cashed out the policy while she was still breathing. You drained every single cent she had to her name. And instead of transferring that money to the surgical center, you used it to pay the final installment on your secret offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Aunt Clara lets out a strangled, agonizing cry, sinking into a nearby armchair as the sheer evil of the act registers. Carter, still pressed against the wall, looks at his wife as if she is an actual demon. He had married a woman who literally stole her own mother's life to fund a tropical escape. You left her with absolutely nothing, I state, stepping right up to Iman. When Mom logged into her accounts the next morning to confirm the hospital transfer, she saw a zero balance. She saw that her medical insurance had been canceled due to non-payment. The shock of realizing her favorite daughter, the child she had destroyed my life to protect, had just left her to die. Penniless was too much for her heart to take. She did not die of natural causes, Iman. She died of a massive stress-induced stroke, because the reality of your betrayal literally broke her heart. You killed her for a luxury vacation. Lear Iman screams, spittle flying from her lips as she thrashes against the captain again. She is a liar. I did not do that. I would never do that to Mom. It was a mistake. The bank made a mistake. The captain jerks her arms, forcing her to stand still. Save it for a jury, he says coldly. We have the wire transfer logs. We have the IP address from your gold tablet confirming you initiated the transfer. We even have the frantic voicemails your mother left on your phone while she was having the stroke, begging you to answer, asking where the money went. You ignored all 7 of her calls because you were busy booking a first-class ticket to Europe. The revelation of the voicemails shatters the final illusion. The family members who had spent their entire lives treating me like a pariah now look at me with profound shame and look at Iman with absolute revulsion. The golden child is dead, replaced by a cold-blooded monster who prioritized an offshore bank account over her own mother's life. The captain gives a sharp nod to his team. Read her rights and get her out of here, he orders. Two tactical agents step forward to drag Iman toward the shattered front doors. The reality of her impending federal on her. The pristine white walls of her stolen mansion are closing in. The billionaire lifestyle she murdered her mother to protect is gone forever. Cornered, exposed, and stripped of every single lie she ever told, Iman completely loses her mind. She digs her heels into the marble floor, twisting her body to face the room one last time. Her face is streaked with running mascara and blood, her eyes wild with a feral, unhinged desperation. If she is going down, she is determined to drag the entire world down into the flames with her. "Wait!" Iman shrieks at the top of her lungs, her voice echoing violently through the foyer. "Wait! You cannot just arrest me. I did not act alone. I swear I did not do this by myself." The agents pause for a fraction of a second, the captain raising an eyebrow. "I did not know how to set up an offshore account." Iman wails, her hysterical gaze snapping directly to Carter. "I am just a marketing dropout. I have no idea how to launder money or execute a living benefits cash out. I had help." Carter's eyes bulge out of his head. He raises his hands defensively, shaking his head. "I did not know anything about this," he stammers. "I swear to God I did not know she was stealing from Vivian." "I am not talking about you, you pathetic idiot!" Iman screams at her husband, a vicious, spiteful smile twisting her tear-stained face. "I am talking about your mother." Carter's mother. "Mrs. Sterling set the entire Cayman account up for me. She taught me how to bypass the IRS. She told me exactly which forms to use to drain Mom's life insurance. She is an accomplice. Arrest her too." The heavy oak doors of the Piedmont Elite Country Club swung open, shattering the quiet hum of lunchtime classical music and clinking crystal. This was the sanctuary of Atlanta's old money, an exclusive whites-only establishment that still operated on unspoken rules of segregation and generational wealth. Seated at the center table on the sunlit veranda was Eleanor Sterling. She was sipping a gin martini surrounded by four other wealthy matriarchs, laughing politely at some trivial country club gossip. She wore a pristine white tennis skirt and a diamond tennis bracelet, blissfully unaware that her son was currently weeping on my floor and her daughter-in-law had just sold her out to the federal government to save her own skin. Desmond and I walked straight onto the veranda. We were flanked by four federal agents wearing dark suits and tactical vests, the sheer visual of two powerful, successful black professionals leading a federal raid into the heart of white high society made the entire dining room freeze. Waiters stopped pouring champagne. The wealthy patrons lowered their forks, staring in absolute stunned silence. Eleanor Sterling lowered her martini glass. Her eyes locked onto me and then shifted to Desmond. She did not immediately recognize the federal agent standing slightly behind us. Her deeply ingrained privilege blinded her to the very concept of consequence. Instead, her face twisted into a mask of pure aristocratic disdain. She waved her manicured hand, gesturing to a nearby manager who was already trembling in fear. "What is the meaning of this disruption?" Eleanor demanded, her voice loud and carrying the distinct sharp edge of racial entitlement. "Who let these people pass the front gate? This is a private club. We do not allow aggressive people to just wander in off the street and harass the members. Security needs to escort them back to whatever neighborhood they came from immediately." The sheer audacity of her microaggressions would have infuriated me a decade ago. Today it just made me smile. I stepped right up to her table, my designer heels clicking sharply against the polished wood deck. The other women at the table scooted their chairs back, exchanging nervous glances as the federal agents moved up to flank me. "Nobody is escorting us anywhere, Eleanor," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and dangerously calm. "And you should probably put down your drink. You are going to need both hands free for the handcuffs." Eleanor let out a sharp, condescending laugh. "Handcuffs," she scoffed, looking at her friends as if I had just spoken a foreign language. "You must be out of your mind, Sienna. Just because you managed to trick a wealthy man into marrying you does not mean you can walk into my club and make baseless threats. You and that entire family of yours are nothing but low-class opportunists." I always told Carter that Iman was a desperate little social climber, but I suppose trash simply breeds trash. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the edge of her table. You are absolutely right about Iman being a desperate social climber, I replied. She was so desperate to impress you that she drained my mother's life insurance policy and left her to die of a stress-induced stroke. But Iman is not the mastermind you think she is. She is just a marketing dropout. She had no idea how to bypass the IRS flag system. She had no idea how to set up a blind trust in the Cayman Islands. Eleanor's smug smile faltered for a fraction of a second. A tiny flicker of panic breached her cold exterior. I do not know what you are talking about, she said stiffly, breaking eye contact and looking toward the club manager again. I want these people removed right now. Desmond stepped forward, his massive frame completely blocking the sunlight, casting a dark shadow over Eleanor and her friends. He did not raise his voice, but the lethal authority radiating from him made the surrounding club members hold their breath. You are not in a position to give orders anymore, Mrs. Sterling, Desmond said smoothly. He pulled a thick, heavy dossier from his jacket and tossed it casually onto the center of the table. The heavy file landed squarely on Eleanor's plate, knocking over her martini glass and spilling gin across the crisp white tablecloth. Eleanor stared at the soaked folder, her hands beginning to tremble. What is this? She whispered. That is your digital footprint, Desmond replied, crossing his arms over his chest. Those are the IP address logs, the offshore wire transfer authorizations, and the encrypted emails between you and Iman. You see, Mrs. Sterling, when my firm bought a controlling interest in your family's real estate empire this morning, we did not just acquire your properties. We acquired your private corporate servers. My forensic accountant spent the last 4 hours tearing through your deleted files. We know you taught Iman exactly how to launder the money she stole from Vivian. I watched the blood drain completely from Eleanor's face, leaving her looking gray and hollow. The other women at the table stared at the exposed bank documents, their eyes widening as they read the staggering sums of stolen money printed in bold black ink. But that is not the best part, I added, stepping closer. You used that exact same offshore routing number to embezzle millions from the Sterling Employee Pension Fund. And an hour ago, when the SWAT team raided my house to arrest Iman, she sang like a canary. She gave the feds every single password to negotiate a plea deal. She threw you right under the bus. Eleanor screamed and thrashed wildly as the federal agent forcefully grabbed her arms. You think you can walk in here and touch old money, she shrieked. I will have your entire firm audited by tomorrow morning. Desmond watched her being dragged away. We will see about that, Mrs. Sterling, he quietly murmured. The sun barely crested the Atlanta skyline when the retaliation hit. Eleanor Sterling might have been sitting in a federal holding cell, but the tentacles of old white money ran deep, and they moved with terrifying speed. I walked into the sleek glass lobby of my venture capital firm, expecting the usual hum of productivity. Instead, I was met with absolute chaos. My receptionist frantically routed dozens of flashing lines. Analysts huddled around their monitors, speaking in hushed, panicked tones. Before I could even reach my office doors, my phone buzzed with an urgent, secure message from Desmond. His massive merger had just been halted by a federal injunction. A coalition of Sterling senators had cited antitrust concerns, effectively freezing his assets. She tried to bleed us dry. But the attack on my husband was only a distraction from the main offensive. As I pushed open the frosted glass doors to the primary boardroom, I found 5 of my top-tier investors already seated. 3 uninvited agents from the Securities and Exchange Commission sat at the head of the table, radiating bureaucratic arrogance. They were actively seizing laptops and carrying physical hard drives out of my accounting department. We are conducting a randomized comprehensive audit of your portfolios. Miss Williams, the lead SEC agent, stated, his tone dripping with the kind of smug superiority designed to put me in my place. Until the investigation concludes, all of your trading accounts are completely frozen. Randomized, I challenged, dropping my designer bag onto the long mahogany table. You secured a federal warrant, dispatched a raid team, and froze my accounts within 12 hours of a country club arrest. That is not random. That is a coordinated political hit, ordered by the Sterling family, to cover up their own crimes. The agent smirked, adjusting his cheap tie. We follow the evidence, Miss Williams. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to worry about. I suggest you cooperate. He signaled his team to leave the room, taking my immediate operational capacity with them. My investors, all older white men who had trusted my aggressive market strategies, began shouting over each other. They threatened to pull their backing, demanding immediate liquidation. "Sit down," I commanded, my voice echoing off the glass walls with sharp, lethal authority. My sheer tone made all 5 men freeze and drop back into their chairs. "You are panicking because the system is doing exactly what it was designed to do," I told them, leaning over the table and making eye contact with each of them. "The system was built to gatekeep wealth. When a black woman walks into this industry and outperforms legacy firms by a margin of 400%, the old guard gets terrified. I did not have a trust fund or a country club pedigree. I had to be 10 times smarter and faster than every single white man in this city just to get a seat at this table. You trusted my instincts then because I made you millions. You are going to trust my instincts now because I am about to make you billions." "Sienna, the SEC just froze our Capital One investor," gasped, wiping his brow. "How do you expect us to survive this?" "I am going to expose the fraudulent nature of this audit," I stated, crossing my arms. "To get a federal judge to sign off on an emergency asset freeze overnight, Eleanor needed more than just a phone call. She needed fabricated financial data that looked credible enough to warrant a raid. The timeline was completely impossible. A federal judge would not authorize an emergency freeze based solely on an angry phone call from a jailed socialite. The Sterlings had to have provided the SEC with falsified internal ledgers detailing our upcoming quarterly projections. Those specific ledgers were highly classified, isolated on an encrypted internal server that only a handful of people in this entire building had the security clearance to access. "We have a mole," I announced, watching the investors exchange terrified glances. "Someone inside this building compiled that fabricated data and handed it directly to the Sterling legal team to trigger this raid. Give me exactly 1 hour to find the damn rat." I dismissed the board and locked myself inside my private office, pulling the blinds down to block the view of the bullpen. I bypassed my standard terminal, knowing the SEC had already mirrored the hard drive. Instead, I pulled a secure encrypted laptop from my personal safe. I had built this company from the ground up, and I knew the architecture of my own servers better than any federal agent ever could. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up the hidden access logs for the specific financial portfolios the SEC had targeted. I ran a cross-reference on all data packet transfers that had occurred between midnight and 6 in the morning. The query processed lines of code reflecting rapidly on the black screen. I filtered the data, looking for unauthorized external transmissions, tracing the digital breadcrumbs someone had desperately tried to scrub. The system chimed. A massive data packet, containing the falsified ledgers, had been exported to an external IP address belonging to the Sterling family primary law firm at exactly 3 in the morning. I ran a trace on the internal login credentials used to authorize the transfer. When the name flashed across my screen, the breath completely left my lungs. I stared at the glowing white letters, feeling a sickening wave of betrayal wash over my chest. The secure login did not belong to a low-level analyst or a disgruntled junior accountant. It belonged to Marcus, my chief operating officer, the man I had personally recruited straight out of business school, the man I had mentored, trained, and elevated for 5 years. He was the one person in this building I trusted implicitly, and he had just sold me out to the people who destroyed my family forever today. I pressed the intercom button on my mahogany desk. "Marcus, please step into my office." My voice was dangerously even. Through the soundproof glass walls, I watched him look up from his workstation. He adjusted his expensive tie and walked toward my door. He moved with the effortless swagger of a man who firmly believed he was untouchable. He stepped inside and closed the heavy glass door, shutting out the panicked noise of the bullpen where the federal agents were currently tearing through our filing cabinets. "Sienna, this SEC raid is an absolute nightmare," Marcus said, shaking his head with a manufactured expression of deep concern. "I have the corporate legal team on standby right now. We need to lock down the primary servers before these agents find anything they can twist out of context to use against us." I smiled, a cold, razor-sharp smile that made him pause mid-step. I remained seated behind my desk, keeping my hands gracefully folded over my encrypted laptop. "You are right, Marcus," I replied smoothly. "It is a nightmare. But the servers are already locked down. I made sure of it right after I traced the massive data export you sent directly to the Sterling family law firm at 3 o'clock this morning." The blood vanished entirely from his face. His confident swagger evaporated in a single instant, leaving behind a terrified hollow shell of a man. He opened his mouth to deny the accusation, but the lie died immediately in his throat when I turned my laptop screen to face him. The glowing white text of his secure digital footprint reflected in his widening eyes. "I know you sent those fabricated ledgers, Marcus. I know you gave Carter Sterling the exact ammunition he needed to trigger this raid and freeze my husband out of his corporate merger." "Sienna, please, you have to understand," Marcus stammered, taking a rapid step backward until his shaking shoulders hit the thick glass door. "I did not want to do it. I swear to God I did not want to betray you. You gave me everything I have in this industry." "Then why did you do it?" I demanded, standing up slowly from my leather chair. My voice did not rise, but the absolute fury radiating from my posture pinned him against the glass. "You sat at my dinner table. You met my husband. You knew exactly what those racist, arrogant parasites did to my family 10 years ago. You knew they were trying to destroy me." Marcus collapsed into one of the leather guest chairs, burying his face in his trembling hands. It was the gambling, he choked out, a pathetic, wretched sob tearing from his throat. "I owe underground syndicates over $500,000. I was drowning in debt and I was desperate. Carter found out about my hidden markers through his elite country club connections. He cornered me in the parking garage last week. Carter told me that if I did not hand over your internal financial projections, he would hand my debt over to a violent collector and ruin my entire career. He said his powerful family would make sure I never worked in finance again. I had no choice, Sienna. He used his privilege and his power to trap me." I looked down at the man I had mentored and protected for 5 long years. He was weak. He had allowed the illusion of white money and old power to convince him that betraying a black woman was his only path to survival. "You always have a choice, Marcus," I stated coldly, stripping him of his pathetic excuses. "You chose to protect your own skin by feeding me to the wolves. But you severely underestimated who you were dealing with today. Carter Sterling is currently sitting in a federal holding cell because he is a coward and a fraud. And you are sitting in my office, about to make the single most important decision of your miserable life." Marcus looked up, his eyes red and pleading for a mercy he did not deserve. "Are you going to call the police? Are you going to open that door and hand me over to the lead SEC agent?" I walked around the mahogany desk and stood directly over him. "I am going to do something much worse if you do not follow my exact instructions right now," I told him. I reached into my tailored jacket pocket and pulled out a small silver flash drive, dropping it heavily onto his lap. "I am not firing you, Marcus. I am weaponizing you against the very people who blackmailed you." He stared at the silver flash drive as if it were a venomous snake about to strike. "What is this?" He whispered, his voice shaking. "It is your only path to redemption," I explained, my tone devoid of any warmth or forgiveness. "On that drive is a highly classified document. It is a completely fabricated internal memo that supposedly proves Desmond engaged in massive insider trading to execute the Sterling corporate takeover. It is exactly the kind of explosive falsified evidence the Sterlings desperately need to distract the federal prosecutors and secure their own release on bail today. You are going to walk out there and log back into your secure terminal right now. You are going to send that document directly to Eleanor Sterling's lead defense attorney. You are going to tell them you panicked during the SEC raid and managed to smuggle out the smoking gun that will permanently destroy Desmond Pierce." Marcus shook his head wildly, frantically wiping cold sweat from his forehead. "Sienna, if I send them that document, they will use it to ruin your husband. They will take it straight to the judge. It will blow up in our faces and send us all to prison." I leaned in close enough that he could see the absolute lethal certainty burning in my eyes. "They will absolutely take it to the judge, Marcus. That is exactly what I am counting on. Do it right now, or I will personally walk out to that bullpen and hand your signed digital confession over to the feds. You will be in handcuffs before lunch." Terrified and completely broken, Marcus scrambled out of the leather chair. He practically ran out of my office to his terminal. Through the glass walls, I watched him type frantically, his hands shaking uncontrollably as he composed the email to the Sterling legal team. He attached the file from the silver drive and hit send. A minute later, my own secure monitor pinged with a bright notification. My embedded tracking software confirmed the email had been successfully received and immediately opened by the defense attorneys. I smiled, watching the digital confirmation light up my dark screen. The trap was set, and the desperate prey had just swallowed the bait whole. The Sterling lawyers were greedy, arrogant, and backed into a corner. They were so blinded by their own privilege and their deep-seated belief that a black billionaire must be inherently corrupt that they would not even bother to authenticate the file. They would enthusiastically submit that document to a federal judge within the hour to secure bail for Eleanor and Carter. They truly thought they had finally found the silver bullet to kill Desmond's massive empire and put me back in my place. I picked up my phone and dialed Desmond's private line. My husband answered on the very first ring. "It is done," I told him, looking out over the chaotic office floor where the agents were still searching for ghosts. Marcus sent the file. The Sterling lawyers just submitted forged evidence to a federal court. It is a felony trap. The heavy mahogany doors of the federal courthouse swung open the following morning, admitting a swarm of overpriced defense attorneys. Sitting at the defense table in drab orange jumpsuits, Carter and Eleanor Sterling looked like entirely different people. Deprived of her country club glamour, Eleanor appeared withered and frail. Carter was visibly shaking his eyes, darting frantically around the gallery. But their lead defense attorney, a silver-haired man named Harrison Vance, radiated pure, unearned confidence. Vance was the epitome of old-money legal protection, and he approached the judge's bench with a smug, triumphant smile, holding a thick manila folder. "Your Honor, we request immediate bail for my clients and an emergency injunction against Desmond Pierce," Vance announced, his voice booming through the packed courtroom. What the prosecution has framed as a legitimate corporate acquisition is nothing but a vicious, coordinated theft. Desmond Pierce and his wife, Sienna Williams, are angry, vengeful opportunists. They harbor a deep-seated generational resentment against the Sterling family legacy. They could not build an empire of their own with honest money, so they resorted to corporate espionage and illegal market manipulation to steal from a respected legacy family. I hold in my hand an internal financial document leaked directly from Sienna Williams' own private server just hours ago. This document proves definitively that Desmond Pierce utilized illegal insider trading tactics to collapse Sterling real estate. Vance slapped the folder onto the bench, staring at Desmond and me in the gallery with absolute contempt. The narrative was crystal clear. He was relying on the deeply ingrained racial bias of the justice system, counting on the judge to believe that a wealthy black couple must have cheated to dethrone a powerful white dynasty. Vance demanded that the Sterlings be released on their own recognizance immediately, and that federal marshals be dispatched to arrest my husband. The federal prosecutor stood up, looking completely unbothered. "Your Honor, the prosecution calls Sienna Williams to the stand to address the authenticity of this so-called evidence." Vance scoffed, crossing his arms as I walked gracefully past the wooden partition and took my seat in the witness box. I placed my hand on the Bible, swore to tell the absolute truth, and looked directly into Harrison Vance's condescending eyes. Miss Williams. Vance began pacing in front of the stand. "Are you going to sit there and deny that this highly classified document originated from the servers inside your venture capital firm?" I leaned forward, adjusting the microphone. "I am not going to deny that at all, Mr. Vance," I replied, my voice calm and ringing with lethal precision. "That document absolutely originated from my personal server. In fact, I personally typed it." Vance smiled broadly, turning to the judge. "Your Honor, she admits it. She admits her husband engaged in insider trading." "I did not admit anything of the sort," I interrupted, slicing right through his grandstanding. "I admitted that I authored the document." "What you failed to realize, Mr. Vance, is that the file you just submitted to a federal court is a honeypot. It is a completely fabricated decoy document that I created last night to catch a corporate spy." The smug smile vanished from Vance's face. Carter sat up perfectly straight in his orange jumpsuit, his breathing suddenly shallow. I turned my attention directly to the federal judge. "Your Honor, that file contains a highly specialized digital watermark and an embedded tracking beacon. When my chief operating officer attempted to steal it under blackmail from the Sterling family, I allowed him to send it to Mr. Vance's law firm. The tracking beacon activated the second the file was opened on their network. But that is not the most interesting part. I pulled a single sheet of paper from my blazer pocket and held it up. The metadata tracker proves that Mr. Vance's legal team did not just receive a stolen document. At exactly 4:12 this morning, someone inside the Sterling defense team intentionally altered the digital timestamps on the document to make it appear as though it was drafted before my husband initiated his corporate takeover. You did not just receive fake evidence, Mr. Vance. You knowingly doctored it to fit your false narrative, and then you willingly submitted forged evidence to a federal judge. The courtroom erupted into a chaotic symphony of gasps and frantic whispering. The federal prosecutor immediately stepped forward, slapping a fresh stack of indictments onto the defense table. Harrison Vance stumbled backward, his face draining of all color as he looked at the judge. "Your Honor," Vance stammered, holding his hands up defensively. "I had no idea my paralegals handled the file transfers. I was not aware of any digital alterations." The judge slammed his gavel down with explosive force. His face was bright red with absolute fury. "Save it for your own defense attorney, Mr. Vance," the judge roared, leaning over the high wooden bench. "You have just committed a federal felony in my courtroom. I am ordering the United States Marshals to seize all computers and servers at your law firm immediately. You are under investigation for evidence tampering and fraud." Carter buried his face in his trembling hands, letting out a loud, pathetic sob. Eleanor Sterling clutched her chest, swaying in her seat as she watched her multi-million-dollar legal defense team implode in less than 5 minutes. The untouchable shield of their white privilege had just been shattered by lines of code and their own blinding arrogance. "As for the bail request," the judge continued, glaring down at Eleanor and Carter with absolute disgust, "bail is categorically denied. The defendants have demonstrated a clear and immediate willingness to tamper with evidence and suborn perjury. They are remanded to federal custody pending trial." Carter jumped to his feet, rattling his handcuffs against the wooden table. "No," he screamed, his voice cracking in sheer panic. "You cannot keep us in here. We will find another lawyer. We will fight this. We have allies. People will testify for us." I stood up from the witness stand, brushing an invisible speck of dust from my tailored jacket. I looked down at my ex-fiancé, smiling with a chilling, radiant warmth. "Actually, Carter, I have one final piece of evidence for the court today." I reached over the wooden partition and handed a sealed blue folder to the federal prosecutor, who immediately passed it up to the furious judge. "There will be no one left to testify for you, Carter," I stated, my voice carrying effortlessly across the silent courtroom. "Because an hour ago, federal prosecutors finalized a very special arrangement. That document is a signed and fully executed plea deal. Your wife, Iman Sterling, has officially turned state's witness. She is currently sitting in an interrogation room at the FBI field office, handing over every single bank record, wire transfer, and offshore account password your family ever used to hide your stolen money. Your own wife just sold you out to buy herself a lighter sentence. You are entirely on your own." The echo of my words hung in the courtroom like a guillotine dropping. Carter collapsed back into his chair, his mouth hanging open in silent horror. Eleanor Sterling gripped the edge of the defense table, her knuckles turning stark white as the federal marshals moved in to escort them back to the subterranean holding cells. They had walked into this courthouse expecting to buy their freedom with high-priced lawyers and old money connections. They were leaving it entirely stripped of their legacy. Deep within the bowels of the federal courthouse, the stark, brutal reality of their situation finally crushed whatever was left of the Sterling family pride. Carter and Eleanor sat on a rigid steel bench inside a freezing concrete holding cell. There were no country club waiters to bring them martinis. There were no politicians to call to make the charges disappear. Their disgraced attorney, Harrison Vance, had been detained for evidence tampering, so they were forced to listen to an overworked court-appointed public defender explain the absolute destruction of their empire. The public defender, a tired-looking woman carrying a thick stack of printed transcripts, slid the paperwork through the narrow slot in the plexiglass partition. "Your daughter-in-law did not just cooperate," the defender stated, her voice completely devoid of sympathy. She systematically dismantled your entire organization. Iman sat in an FBI interrogation room for 6 grueling hours and provided them with the exact locations of your hidden offshore ledgers. Carter shook his head frantically, gripping the metal table until his fingers ached. What ledgers? He gasped, his eyes wide and bloodshot. We destroyed those hard drives months ago. Iman mod physical copies. Eleanor the defender continued, ignoring Carter completely. She told the feds exactly how the Sterling real estate empire was actually funded over the last 2 decades. She detailed the illegal kickbacks your company paid to local zoning board members to secure commercial permits in redlined black neighborhoods. She mapped out the complex money laundering networks you used to funnel illicit cash through shell companies disguised as charitable foundations. She handed them the absolute perfect blueprint to a massive federal racketeering operation. Eleanor stared at the documents through the scratched plexiglass, her breathing becoming shallow and erratic. She is a liar. Eleanor hissed, her voice trembling with a mixture of raw terror and aristocratic rage. She is a desperate little liar trying to save her own skin. No federal judge will believe a word that pathetic social climber says about this family. They do not have to believe her, the public defender replied flatly, leaning back in her hard plastic chair. They verified the bank routing numbers she provided. The Securities and Exchange Commission officially moved forward 30 minutes ago. They executed a full civil asset forfeiture under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. Carter jumped up from the steel bench, the heavy chains around his waist rattling loudly against the cold concrete walls. What does that mean? He demanded, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, frantic shriek. It means the SEC just seized absolutely everything the defender stated. The primary operating accounts, the backup trusts, the penthouse in Manhattan, the ski lodge in Aspen, the fleet of luxury vehicles, and the Cayman Island reserves you thought were completely untraceable. All of it is gone. You are completely destitute, Mr. Sterling. You do not have the funds to hire private counsel. You do not have the funds to pay restitution. Based on the mountain of evidence Iman handed over, the federal prosecutors are pursuing a mandatory minimum sentence of 20 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. Both of you will likely die behind bars. The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow to the chest. The invincible matriarch of the Sterling dynasty slumped forward, clutching her heart as a guttural, agonizing sob tore from her throat. She realized she would never set foot in her exclusive country club again. She would trade her tailored designer gowns for a scratchy, oversized orange jumpsuit. Her entire legacy, built on exploitation and white privilege, had been completely eradicated by the very black woman she had allowed into her home as a token accessory. Carter paced the tiny cell like a caged animal, kicking the steel bench and screaming obscenities. He cursed his mother for forcing him to marry Iman, he cursed Iman for betraying him, and he cursed me for surviving it all. There was no honor among thieves, and they were finally eating each other alive in the dark. While the Sterlings were imploding in a subterranean cell, I was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my venture capital firm, looking out over the glittering Atlanta skyline. Desmond stood right behind me, his strong arms wrapped securely around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. We had done it. We had excised the toxic cancer that had infected my life a decade ago, and we had reclaimed the power my mother and the Sterlings had tried to steal. I leaned back into his solid chest, feeling the adrenaline of the courtroom victory settling into a deep, unshakable peace. Then the encrypted cell phone sitting on my mahogany desk began to vibrate fiercely. I pulled away from Desmond, frowning as I walked over to the desk. The caller ID displayed the direct secure line for the district attorney. I picked up the phone, putting it on speaker so Desmond could hear. We just left the courthouse, I said, keeping my tone light and victorious. Please tell me you are calling to confirm Carter and Eleanor have been officially processed into the general population. Sienna, we have a massive situation. The district attorney barked, his voice tight with genuine, unfiltered panic. The victory I had been savoring instantly evaporated, replaced by a sharp, chilling survival instinct. What happened? I demanded, leaning over the desk, my hands gripping the edge. Iman exploited a loophole in her plea agreement. The district attorney explained, the sound of frantic shouting and ringing phones echoing in the background of his office. Part of her negotiation for immunity required her to physically hand over a master hard drive containing the original unedited ledgers. She claimed the drive was hidden in a secure biometric safety deposit box at a private facility on the outskirts of the city. She convinced the federal judge that she needed to retrieve it in person because the vault required her specific retinal scan to open. Desmond stepped up to the desk, his eyes narrowing dangerously. "You gave a massive flight risk a furlough," he growled, his voice radiating lethal disapproval. "It was a standard, 24-hour evidence retrieval furlough." The district attorney protested defensively. She was fitted with a federal GPS tracking ankle monitor and escorted by two highly trained armed agents. But 10 minutes ago, she asked to use the restroom at a gas station just off the interstate. She never came out. When the agents kicked the bathroom door down, they found her ankle monitor sitting in the sink. She managed to sever the tracking band with a pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters she must have stashed there previously. The signal just went completely dark. "She does not have the hard drive, Sienna. She played us to get out of the holding facility. Iman is making a run for it." I slammed the phone down. The government lost their critical witness. Desmond did not panic. He pulled a secondary encrypted phone from his jacket. "The feds lost her," he said, his voice a low rumble, "but she is running with offshore cash. She needs a private charter, and there are only 3 unregulated airstrips outside Atlanta catering to ghost flights." I grabbed my coat. "Let us go hunting." Within 60 seconds, we were in his armored SUV speeding out of the city limits. Desmond was hacking into flight manifests. Iman was desperate but predictable. She relied on the exact networks the Sterlings used to bypass oversight. It took less than 10 minutes to locate a ghost charter filed under a dummy corporation linked to Eleanor Sterling. The flight was departing from a rusted airfield 30 miles away. On the cracked tarmac, Iman scrambled out of a stolen ride-share vehicle. She hauled a massive duffel bag packed to the bursting point with untraceable $100 bills over her shoulder. She clutched a fake blue passport in her trembling hand. The wind whipped her unwashed hair across her face. She looked like a cornered feral animal. She threw herself up the metal stairs of the idling Gulfstream jet, shoving past a startled flight attendant. "Close the door," Iman shrieked, dumping the heavy bag onto a plush leather seat. "Tell the pilot to take off right now. I paid for immediate departure." The attendant took a cautious step back. "Ma, and we are still waiting for clearance." "I said take off," Iman roared. She stormed toward the open cockpit, waving her passport at the pilot. "Listen to me, you glorified taxi driver," she snapped. "I paid your boss $50,000 in cash for a direct flight to Zurich. If we do not leave this runway in 2 minutes, I will ensure you never fly another plane again." The pilot simply continued his pre-flight checks, ignoring her. Iman paced the narrow aisle, her chest heaving as she talked aloud to herself, completely disconnected from reality. "They thought they could lock me in a cage," she muttered, gripping a seat back until her knuckles turned white. "They thought I would take the fall for Carter's incompetence while they took everything. Carter was weak. My mother was weak. I carried this entire family and they dragged me down." She looked at her reflection in the darkened window, smoothing her hair with shaking hands. She felt absolutely zero remorse for leaving our mother to die penniless and alone. She felt no guilt for stealing millions from the people who trusted her. She only felt hot, burning anger that she had been caught by the sister she despised. "I do not need them," Iman whispered, a twisted, arrogant smile creeping back onto her face. "I have $5 million right here. I will land in Europe by morning. I will change my name and go to Monaco. I will find a European aristocrat who actually knows how to hide his money. I will build an even bigger empire and make sure Sienna rots in Atlanta playing house with her new money husband. I always win." Iman sat down heavily, pulling the duffel bag onto her lap like a shield. She closed her eyes, listening to the twin engines whining as they spooled up to full power. She let out a long breath, believing she had successfully outsmarted the FBI and her sister. But then the high-pitched whine of the engines abruptly stuttered. The powerful vibration humming through the cabin completely stopped. The jet engines powered down, groaning as they spun to a dead halt. The cabin lights flickered wildly before shutting off entirely, plunging the interior into the dim shadows of the early evening. Iman's eyes snapped open, panic instantly seizing her throat. What is happening? She shrieked, jumping up. Why did the engine stop? Turn them back on. The hydraulic latch of the main cabin door suddenly clicked loudly in the silence. The door folded outward, lowering the metal stairs back down to the tarmac. Iman rushed toward the exit, ready to scream at whatever mechanic was interrupting her flight. But it was not a mechanic walking up those stairs. It was not the flight attendant either. I stepped into the cabin, my heels clicking sharply against the metal threshold. Desmond stepped in right behind me, his massive frame completely blocking the exit. The fading sunlight cast long, imposing shadows across the aisle. Iman froze in her tracks, all the blood rushing out of her face. She stumbled backward, tripping over the heavy duffel bag of cash and falling hard into a leather seat. "Hello, Iman," I said, my voice ringing with a cold, lethal clarity. "Leaving the country so soon. You did not even pack a toothbrush." Sienna Iman gasped, her entire body trembling as she pressed herself against the window. "No. How did you find me? You cannot be here. This is a private flight." Iman scrambled out of the seat and lunged toward the cockpit, banging her fists against the doorframe. "Pilot," she screamed, raw desperation tearing at her vocal cords. "Take off. Start the plane and run them over. I will pay you double right now. Start the plane." The pilot stood up from his leather seat, turning around to face the cabin. He completely ignored my sister's hysterical screaming. Instead, he calmly adjusted his uniform, stepped out of the cockpit, and tipped his hat respectfully to my husband. The pilot did not say a single word to Iman. He simply walked past her down the aisle and stepped off the plane, leaving her trapped. I smiled warmly, crossing my arms over my chest. "I told you, Iman," I said, keeping my tone perfectly measured and brutally calm. "Desmond's firm acquires assets. We bought this charter company an hour ago. You are trespassing on my plane." Iman stared at me as my words crushed her delusions. The heavy duffel bag of stolen cash slipped from her lap, hitting the floor of the cabin with a dull thud. Her legs gave out. She collapsed onto the carpet, landing hard on her knees. The untouchable golden child who spent her life stepping on my neck was groveling at my heels. The arrogant fire evaporated from her face, leaving a terrified shell. "Sienna, please," Iman gasped, her voice cracking into a wretched sob. She reached out, clawing desperately at the hem of my trousers. "Please do not do this to me. You cannot hand me over to them. I am your sister. We share the same blood. We grew up under the same roof. You are the only family I have left. You have to protect me." I looked down at her, feeling nothing. No pity. No sisterly affection. Just a cold, sterile observation of a parasite severed from its host. I took a deliberate step back, pulling my fabric out of her grasp. Desmond remained a silent sentinel behind me, ensuring she did not try anything foolish. "Do not ever use the word family with me, Iman," I stated, my voice ringing with a chilling clarity. "You lost the right to call yourself my sister a decade ago. You think shedding a few tears is going to erase what you did. You invoke our shared blood now that you are facing federal prison. Where was that sisterhood 10 years ago when you colluded with Mom to steal my fiancé? I did it for you." Iman wept violently, shaking her head. "Carter was weak. I took him so you could build your business. I suffered his terrible family so you could be free. You did it because you were a lazy coward who wanted a shortcut to a country club lifestyle," I snapped, cutting off her pathetic revisionist history. "You slept with a street-level drug dealer, got pregnant, and let Mom forge medical records to destroy my reputation. You watched Carter break my heart and smiled while you put on my engagement ring. You spent 10 years parading your white wealth, trying to make me feel inferior because you were desperately covering up the fact that you were an absolute fraud." Iman buried her face in her hands, her shoulders heaving with ugly, ragged sobs. "I had no choice," she wailed. "Mom made me do it. She controlled everything we did." "And is that why you killed her?" I demanded, my tone dropping to a deadly whisper that made her flinch. "Did Mom make you drain her life insurance policy? Did Mom make you cancel her medical coverage so you could fund your secret Cayman Islands account? You left the woman who engineered your entire fraudulent life to die of a stress-induced stroke because you wanted a luxury vacation. You destroyed everyone who ever loved or protected you, Iman. Carter is sitting in the holding cell right now, facing 20 hard years because of your actions. Mom is dead because of your unfettered greed. You are a virus. Blood makes you related. Loyalty makes you family. You have neither." The heavy thud of tactical boots marching up the metal stairs of the jet broke through her hysterical crying. The federal marshals had arrived. They moved with swift, terrifying efficiency. 4 heavily armed agents flooded the narrow cabin of the plane, completely surrounding my sister, blocking every avenue of escape. "I-Man Sterling, you are under arrest," a senior marshal barked, grabbing her by the shoulders and hauling her roughly to her feet. "You are in direct violation of your federal plea agreement and are being charged with immediate flight to avoid prosecution." No, Iman screamed, thrashing wildly against their unyielding iron grips. "Let me go. Sienna, tell them to stop. Tell them I am your sister. I will give you the money. You can have all the cash in the bag. Just let me walk away." The marshals did not hesitate for a single second. They slammed her against the leather bulkhead and yanked her arms behind her back, securing her wrists with heavy cold steel handcuffs. One of the agents reached into her designer coat pocket and extracted the fake blue passport, tossing it onto the nearest passenger seat. Another agent grabbed the heavy duffel bag of stolen cash, securing it firmly as federal evidence. They systematically stripped her of her stolen wealth, her fake identity, and her fragile freedom in a matter of fleeting seconds. An agent stepped forward and unceremoniously grabbed the collar of her expensive tailored coat, pulling it roughly off her shoulders. "It is evidence, Mom," he stated coldly as she shivered in her thin silk blouse. Iman kicked and thrashed her perfect hair wild and matted to her tear-stained face. She looked absolutely deranged, fighting against the inevitable crushing reality of a bleak concrete cell. Desmond wrapped his arms securely around my waist, pulling me slightly out of the way as the marshals began dragging her down the narrow aisle toward the open cabin door. Sienna, Iman shrieked, her voice tearing painfully at her vocal cords. "You cannot do this to me. I am a Sterling. I belong in a mansion, not a cage. You are a monster, Sienna. You are a cold-blooded monster." I walked slowly down the aisle, following them closely to the threshold of the plane. I stood at the top of the metal stairs, looking down as they dragged her kicking and screaming onto the dark, cracked tarmac below. The flashing red and blue lights of the federal transport vans illuminated her ruined, tearful face. I leaned against the doorframe, watching the absolute destruction of the golden child. 10 years ago, you stole a coward and a fake lifestyle. I called out, my voice carrying effortlessly over the loud roar of the idling transport vehicles. Today you can keep them. Enjoy prison, Iman. 1 month passed since the flashing lights of the federal transport vans carried my sister away into the dark. The dust had settled on the Sterling Empire, leaving behind nothing but bankrupt shell companies and shattered egos. Tonight the narrative in Atlanta belonged entirely to us. Desmond and I were hosting the inaugural Pierce Foundation Gala at the High Museum of Art. It was the absolute pinnacle of Black excellence. A $10 million philanthropic event, explicitly designed to fund and elevate Black female entrepreneurs who were building their own empires from the ground up. The museum courtyard was transformed into an ultra-luxurious paradise. Dozens of crystal chandeliers hung suspended from towering oak trees. A fleet of Black luxury vehicles lined up along Peachtree Street, depositing the most powerful and influential figures in the country. Politicians, industry titans, and celebrities walked the sprawling red carpet, flanked by a relentless wall of flashing paparazzi cameras. I stood inside the grand glass foyer, wearing a custom emerald green silk gown that swept the floor, feeling the steady, reassuring warmth of Desmond's hand resting on the small of my back. But outside the velvet ropes, a very different scene was unfolding. Through the towering glass doors, I spotted a commotion near the main guest check-in podium. A group of loud, disruptive individuals was aggressively arguing with my elite private security detail. I did not need to step outside to recognize the harsh, shrill voices of Aunt Beatrice and Aunt Clara. They had brought along a dozen opportunistic cousins dressed in rented tuxedos and outdated sequined dresses, pushing their way to the front of the line like they owned the venue. "Do you have any idea who we are?" Aunt Beatrice shouted, jabbing her finger into the chest of a massive security guard. "We are VIP guests. We are Sienna's blood family. I am her aunt. I practically raised that girl when her mother was busy. You better unclip that velvet rope right now before I have my niece fire you on the spot." Aunt Clara chimed in, nodding vigorously as she clutched a cheap knockoff designer bag. "We are the guests of honor. Sienna is a billionaire now. and she knows she owes her success to the strong family foundation we provided. Move aside and let us through." The sheer audacity was almost breathtaking. These were the exact same women who had stood in my living room 30 days ago and nodded in enthusiastic agreement when Iman tried to frame me for murder. These were the women who had spent my entire childhood telling my mother that my ambition was a mental illness. They had watched Vivian auction off my future to secure a white son-in-law, and they had clapped at the wedding. Now that Vivian was dead, Iman was sitting in a federal penitentiary awaiting trial, and the sterling money had evaporated. They had suddenly remembered my name. They saw the Forbes articles. They saw the philanthropic endowment. They showed up tonight expecting me to usher them into the VIP lounge, hand them blank checks, and elevate their social status simply because we shared a genetic bloodline. I looked up at Desmond. He raised an eyebrow, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his handsome face. "Do you want me to have them escorted to the city limits?" he asked, his voice a low, protective rumble. I smoothed the emerald silk of my skirt. "No," I replied, my tone completely even. "I am going to handle the trash myself." The heavy glass doors parted as Desmond and I stepped out onto the red carpet. The moment the paparazzi spotted us, the flashes erupted into a blinding strobe light effect. Reporters called out our names, clamoring for a quote about the massive grant program we were launching tonight. But my attention was focused entirely on the barricade. Aunt Beatrice spotted me immediately. Her face lit up with a massive, greedy smile that exposed every single one of her teeth. "Sienna," she shrieked, waving both arms frantically over the head of the security guard. "Sienna, baby, over here. Tell these arrogant goons to let your family inside. We have been waiting out in the cold for 20 minutes. Aunt Clara pushed her way to the front of the barricade, blowing air kisses. "We are so proud of you, sweetheart. We brought the whole family to celebrate your big night. We knew you would want your blood relatives at the head table." The paparazzi, sensing the sudden familial drama, swiveled their massive camera lenses toward the barricade, capturing the aunties in all their desperate, groveling glory. I walked slowly down the red carpet, the emerald train of my gown gliding effortlessly behind me. Desmond stayed one step back, allowing me to command the space entirely on my own. I stopped just 2 feet away from the velvet rope. Beatrice reached her arms out over the barricade, expecting me to embrace her, expecting me to validate her public performance of familial devotion. I did not reach back. I stood perfectly still, looking at her with an expression of absolute glacial ice. I let my eyes drag slowly over Beatrice, then over Clara, then over every single opportunistic cousin who had never once picked up the phone to check on me when I was struggling to build my business. I looked at the people who had actively participated in my emotional destruction for nearly 4 decades. "Sienna, honey." Beatrice faltered, her outstretched arms slowly dropping as the freezing reality of my gaze pierced through her greed. "What is wrong? Tell them to let us in. We need to discuss the family trust. Since Iman is locked up, we know you are going to take care of us. We are your family." I turned my head slightly, looking directly at the imposing head of my security detail. The camera shutters around us clicked frantically, capturing every single second of the exchange. "Excuse me," I said, my voice projecting with lethal, crystal-clear authority over the noise of the crowd. "I do not know these people." Beatrice gasped, her eyes bugging out of her head. "Sienna, what are you saying? I am your aunt. I do not know these people," I repeated, raising my voice so the surrounding reporters could hear every single syllable. "They are not on the guest list. They are trespassing at a private charity gala. Remove them from the premises immediately." The security guards did not hesitate. They moved in unison, grabbing the aunties by their arms and physically forcing them backward away from the VIP entrance. The cousins began shouting in protest, but the imposing tactical guards easily overpowered them. "You cannot do this to us," Clara screamed, her voice cracking in pure hysteria as a guard shoved her toward the sidewalk. "We are your blood. You owe us, Sienna. You owe your family." I stepped right up to the velvet rope, leaning in, so only she could hear my final verdict. "Blood makes you related, Clara. Loyalty makes you family. You chose your family 10 years ago, and they are currently wearing orange jumpsuits. Go ask the federal warden for a handout." I turned my back on them, completely severing the toxic generational curse that had suffocated my family tree for decades. The paparazzi snapped hundreds of photos of Beatrice and Clara being humiliatingly dragged away from the red carpet, screaming and crying, as they were physically removed from my world forever. I did not look back. I had cut the rot out at the root, and for the first time in my entire life, the soil was finally clean. I stepped back through the towering glass doors of the High Museum, leaving the chaotic shouts of my former relatives to fade completely into the humid Atlanta night. The heavy doors clicked shut, sealing away the last remnants of my toxic past. Inside the grand foyer, the atmosphere was electric, a vibrant symphony of clinking crystals, soaring laughter, and unapologetic black wealth. I walked down the sweeping marble staircase, and the crowd naturally parted for me. I was no longer the unwanted daughter shrinking in the shadows of a Buckhead mansion. I was the architect of my own destiny. The gala was an unprecedented triumph. In the span of 3 hours, the Pierce Foundation had raised and distributed over $15 million in venture capital directly to Black female founders. I spent the evening shaking hands with brilliant women who were building tech startups, green energy grids, and groundbreaking medical research facilities. Women who had been told no by the very same traditional white banking systems that had protected families like the Sterlings for generations. We were not just breaking the glass ceiling tonight, we were buying the entire building and replacing the locks. Every time I handed a grant check to a new founder, I felt another piece of my childhood trauma dissolve. I was actively funding the exact independence my mother had tried to beat out of me. Across the sprawling ballroom, massive digital displays illuminated the walls, showcasing the foundation's upcoming initiatives. But as I walked past the ultra-exclusive VIP lounge, my eyes caught the glow of the muted televisions hanging above the mahogany bar. The local and national news networks were running their late-night segments, and the headlines flashing across the bottom of the screens told a story of absolute poetic justice. Federal sentencing handed down in Sterling real estate racketeering case. The footage cut to a courtroom sketch, then to actual high-definition video of Carter and Eleanor Sterling being led out of the federal courthouse in heavy iron shackles. Eleanor looked completely hollowed out, stripped of her country club pearls and her suffocating white privilege. Carter kept his head down, hiding from the glaring camera flashes, a broken coward facing a mandatory 20-year sentence, without the possibility of parole. Then the broadcast cut to a different holding facility. The screen filled with the image of Iman. My sister, the former golden child, was sobbing uncontrollably, her face buried in her trembling hands. She was wearing a scratchy, oversized orange jumpsuit, her designer clothes and stolen diamonds replaced by state-issued canvas. Her plea deal had kept her out of maximum security, but she was still facing a solid decade behind bars for international wire fraud and elder abuse. The news anchor's ticker tape shifted to a new graphic displaying the Pierce Capital logo. Sterling Real Estate Empire liquidated, rebranded as Pierce Community Housing. We had taken the massive portfolio of red-lined, gentrified properties Carter's family had hoarded and converted them into affordable commercial spaces for the exact minority business owners they had previously evicted. I watched the silent footage of Iman weeping in her concrete cell, and I felt absolutely nothing. Society constantly pushes a toxic narrative on abused women, especially Black women. We are told to be the bigger person. We are pressured to forgive our abusers for the sake of our own healing. We are expected to swallow our anger, smile politely, and welcome toxic family members back into our lives because holding a grudge is supposedly bad for the soul. I reject that narrative entirely. I did not forgive my mother for selling me out. I did not forgive my sister for trying to destroy my freedom. And I certainly did not forgive Carter or his racist family for weaponizing their wealth against me. My healing did not come from a forced, hollow reconciliation. My peace came from holding them strictly accountable for every single choice they made. It came from standing my ground, matching their cruelty with tactical brilliance, and watching the federal justice system lock them in cages built by their own unfettered greed. There is a profound, sweet liberation in refusing to save people who willingly jumped off a cliff just to pull you down with them. I turned away from the television screens, leaving my sister's tear-stained face to the harsh glare of the 24-hour broadcasting cycle. She had made her bed, and now she was going to sleep in it for the next 10 years. A familiar, heavy warmth settled against my spine. I leaned back instantly, recognizing the solid, protective presence of my husband. Desmond wrapped his arm around my waist, slipping a chilled crystal flute of vintage champagne into my hand. He looked incredibly handsome in his tailored tuxedo, his dark eyes gleaming with deep pride and unshakable devotion. He had stood by me through the fire, trusting my strategy and backing my every move with his lethal corporate power. "We just received the final tally," Desmond murmured, his deep voice, a soothing rumble against my ear. "The foundation broke every existing fundraising record in the state. The board is thrilled, the investors are celebrating, and the SEC just officially cleared your firm of all those fabricated audit charges. You won, Sienna. You won everything." I took a slow sip of the crisp champagne, savoring the taste of absolute victory. Desmond reached into his inner breast pocket and pulled out a sleek leather travel wallet. He opened it to reveal 2 first-class boarding passes stamped with the Air France logo. "Our private jet is fueled and waiting on the tarmac," he said, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to the side of my neck. "We have a global summit to attend, and a penthouse suite overlooking the Eiffel Tower ready for us." "Ready for Paris, Mrs. Pierce." I turned in his arms, looking past his shoulder at the towering floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the museum. The dark glass reflected the grand ballroom behind me, a room filled with power, wealth, and black excellence. But more importantly, it reflected the woman standing in the center of it all. I saw a woman who had fought her way through decades of emotional hell, betrayal, and sabotage. A woman who refused to be the scapegoat, who shattered the golden child illusion, and who brought an entire corrupt dynasty to its knees without breaking a single sweat. I smiled at my reflection, feeling the heavy armor I had worn for 10 years finally fall away completely. I clinked my crystal glass against Desmond's, the clear chime ringing out like a victory bell. "I am ready," I said, my voice steady, powerful, and entirely free. "Let them rot." The greatest lesson from this journey is that blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family. Society often pressures us to forgive toxic relatives for the sake of peace. True peace actually comes from setting unbreakable boundaries. You do not owe your success or your sanity to people who only loved you when they could control you. Walking away from generational trauma is never a betrayal. It is a necessary act of profound self-love. Have you ever had to cut ties with toxic family members to protect your peace? Share your story in the comments and subscribe today.